Renegade, a solid arcade 1986 beat-em-up classic by Taito. Solid as in this game was designed to eat your money very quickly and leave you crying and run into your mum for more money. Partly inspired by Bruce Lee and using the aesthetic of the 1979 classic Warriors film, this is a damn challenging game. If you haven't played before, you have to take on the entire gang and then the boss with just one single chance each time at this. The game predates Double Dragon by around a year, although both were actually developed by Technos Japan. Renegade certainly took beat-em-ups to a new level, a whole host of moves including flying kicks, roundhouse kicks, backwards kicks and many more. The game truly is one tough cookie. It was loved by the arcade crowd and likely loved even more for its particular home computer and console conversions. In today's video, we are ranking Renegade from worst to best as requested by many of you over the past couple of weeks. This was my first time of playing the Apple II conversion of this game. I instantly thought that the sprites were looking a little more like zombies. I just couldn't really place my finger on it. Then suddenly zombified Smurfs came to mind. Every now and again in this arcade port series, the 1977 Apple II computer comes along. I will firstly say, as always for these games, for such a dated machine, it was nice that popular arcade games were being ported to it by the late 1980s. But still, come on, this conversion deviates from the source material in many ways. For example, to finish stage 1, instead of everything happening on the subway platform, we firstly have to defeat a few baddies, then walk to the train, fight inside of the train, and then finish off the stage back on the platform where we started to stage 1. One huge noticeable difference besides gangs looking like those zombified Smurfs was the music and sound effects. When too much was happening on screen, and to be fair, not much was happening simultaneously, the music seriously slows down. It's fairly bad as well as the controller response with this port. Input lag was a big issue here for sure. Finally, the color palette used here, well, let's just say Apple II's palette was limited with colors. Firstly, for those not familiar with the Thomson M05, this was a French 8-bit home computer produced to compete against the mighty ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64 market of the time. This Amiga version, released way back in 1988, isn't a masterpiece, but certainly not great compared with other ports in this video. Firstly, the boss who overlooks his gang's fight is missing here. Normally, you will see him beside the train on stage 1. No music or introduction to the first fight, and very rudimentary sound effects here too. The real annoyance with this version is its awful collision detection. I went to attack enemies several times, and it just seemed to miss them entirely. I also found that the controller seemed very sluggish when pulling off moves with this game. It's much like a ZX Spectrum looking game, that monochrome look, but nothing really too fancy. Like I said, it's playable to an extent, but there is much better to come with this video. Firstly, this is one of the only computer ports that multi-scrolls, which scrolls actually surprisingly well. I played this game using the EGA modes with the best sound settings available. Although we didn't get hordes of gangs appear simultaneously, that is to be expected. But to be fair, if computer versions did too much, then frame drops would likely be a problem, and the IBM DOS compatible is no exception here. Having said that, even with just a few baddies to fight before the gang leader joins in to beat you up, the sprites don't move too smoothly. They go from very slow pace to extremely fast, and collision detection with this DOS conversion isn't the greatest either. Colour wise, I will just say that starting stage 2 seemed more like an ice rink within colour rather than a dirt road that it's supposed to be. Let's just remember that PC gaming in the 1980s wasn't as great as what it was to become in the 90s. For a Taito conversion, this really isn't that impressive. I will praise the music and sound effects though. In most DOS arcade conversions I have covered so far in this series, these have largely been ear-piercing beeper sounds. The Commodore Amiga port of Renegade contains something very noticeable when playing. That 4-bar rock and roll music has been replaced with something almost ungodly. Possibly the developers thought that the music just sounded far too dated for this Amiga game. Who knows? Now on with this conversion, surely a step up, and we generally get all gang members here, which is overwhelming, which was the original arcade game's intention. A gang of chaps thugs is very intimidating, and this is where the game works so well, that life or death scenario. Issue with the Amiga port is largely its bad control mechanics. I have played many versions using just one action button or 2 buttons and have managed to play fairly well, but this port just didn't translate those over too well. Collision detection is also way off here too. For a powerful 16-bit computer from that era, the boss isn't even animated. This isn't a great Amiga game by any means. Not much better than the Commodore Amiga version. I found this Atari ST conversion a little bit more responsive to controls and hit collision detection. Not by much though, to be honest, but just a tiny bit where I ranked the ST port higher up. The music again is different here from the arcades game in most other ports, but I found this music a little bit easier to listen to than the Amiga. Just like most ST games, the gameplay screen is smaller, but having said that, it wasn't overly pixelated like the Commodore Amiga's version. A below average version when, just like Amiga, could have really been a great game. I had high hopes of the Commodore 64 conversion by Imagine being good. It's not a game I played on my C64 growing up, although I did play Target Renegade. The big issue with this port is by far the controller scheme. If you haven't played this conversion, we use a joystick to control the player and a couple of keyboard keys to pull off actions. Is this a good combination? Well, not really. It's the type of game that takes a while to get into with an odd controller setup like this version. Secondly, although this game is fairly smooth to play and sprites move nicely too, it's fairly ugly to look at. Very blocky, that is. Colour wise, fairly dull colours from our American 8-bit computer friends. I am sure that when this released, many kids thought that their joysticks had broken at the time. A while later, just to realise that the keyboard had to be used. Music and sound effects isn't much to boast about, but yeah, definitely playable providing you get used to those horrendous controls. Although the NES conversion by Taito directly isn't necessarily an awful game, like we have covered in this video, it is missing a couple of things: the overcrowding of gangs, as well as the boss who waits and observes next to the subway train. We have 3 to 4 baddies to defeat here, and although this one's given a flicker-free presentation with sprites that most NES games had back then, this one just seemed a little bit strange to play. I think to an extent maybe the pace was a little far too fast compared with the arcade games in most other versions I played here in this video. The music itself and sound effects are fairly faithful to the source material. I think overly the Nintendo NES conversion just looked a little too bright and bubbly for a game originally intended to look a little gritty. It's difficult to rank this conversion because in terms of collision detection it's pretty much spot on, and it really controls well too with no input lag. I look at the Sega Master System conversion as a massive upgrade from Nintendo NES version. This port truly is a great game in many respects. It is lovely to play and collision detection is really solid here. Sprites, or tiles as some people refer to them as, used here on the contrary to the NES version looks a little better and just overly feels like it was actually attempting to copy the source material. Of course, just like a couple of other versions here in this video, the Sega Master System also sees us go inside of the subway train to finish stage 1. That being said, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this game, but just as always, we're looking for the most accurate to the arcade game here. There is of course other bits and pieces missing here, just like most other versions in this video. I would likely say that this was one of Sega Master System's best beat-em-ups for sure. The Amstrad CPC conversion is damn good, but keep this in mind, we are still looking for arcade excellence, and this port isn't that far from getting first place in this video if I'm honest. Absolutely one of the CPC's best beat-em-ups, without a doubt. It even had a fan-made remake of it just a couple of years back, which improved on an already excellent 8-bit microcomputer game. Before I move on to the winning port, I will note here that by no means was this version and the next version actually easy to decipher which version played the best. This was really tough, although this version in the next platform's version was missing that train fighting segment of the first stage, which of course puts this before the Master System and Nintendo NES ports. If you had the ZX Spectrum version by Imagine back in 1987, you were likely jumping up and down in joy that an arcade game conversion really was this great. The 128K version that I am playing here had it all: the music, sound effects, the looks, and that semi-isometric look to go with it all, just like the arcade original. Where this port really excels is its amazing hit collision detection and actually moving the player around on screen. It really is pretty much faultless here, and pretty much one of the best, if not the very best, Spectrum beat-em-ups ever released during its commercial years. The range of attacks you can pull off with ease is seriously impressive and kind of felt easier to control than actual real arcade version itself. Of course, we have some folks which will look down on Spectrum games. All I can say is get past his monochrome look and enjoy the game, because it really is that great to play. Sure, it's not full colour, but like most old school gamers will say, it's all about the gameplay after all, and not necessarily about how it looks, if it looks fantastic, that is. I am sure I will have haters with this choice, but just remember, my opinion isn't your opinion, and people are very different with their views with games and rankings. Anyways, that's it for ranking Renegade arcade game ports today. So which version would you have ranked it number 1? So admittedly, this was a really awkward video to judge because the Amstrad and Spectrum versions truly were fantastic 8-bit micro ports. Anyways, which version did you play? Did you play the Commodore 64 version, or was you unfortunate enough to have the Apple II version back in the day? Anyways, until next video comes, thanks for watching.